Welcome back, mineral enthusiasts, to part two, in which we've been discussing about the moon cycles, moon minerals, moon organs and glands and diseases. And we're going to continue with the pineal gland, the seat of the soul. And the pineal gland produces sulfate by day, responding to light, and stores it as a heparin sulfate molecule. So again, this is the importance of light, the secret of light, to produce the sulfate via the sun and to produce melatonin via darkness. So alchemy has always understood the yin yang, and then the alchemical holy trinity has always been mercury, sulfur, and salt. So of course we're going to talk about Mercury when we do the planet Mercury, and we're going to get more into sulfur when we look at Jupiter and the sun. But to understand how important sulfation is and how important light is to this whole aspect, since we're always talking about light and darkness, the balance of the yin and the yang, I just wanted to present you with sulfation because it's an absolutely integral part of mineral balancing. So when we talk about sulfation, you know, the sulfate miracle worker, sulfate is basically you have a sulfur, one ion of sulfur, 4 oxygen molecules, and then that creates SO4 with a -2 charge. That -2 charge is very important for the fluids, for the viscosity of the fluids, especially when the red blood cells that have that cell membrane, that cholesterol sulfated cell membrane can flow through the blood because of its -2 charge that will repel the other blood cells from sticking together. So you don't get clumpy blood, thick blood, sticky blood. The blood, that juice of life will flow through the body, and that is the water element. So sulfation is very important for basically when you sulfate a hormone. So just think all your adrenal hormones are sulfated because the sulfation, when you sulfate, whether it's estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, DHEA, cortisol, aldosterone, vitamin D, all those hormones have to be sulfated so they can be transported from point A to point B. And so when you sulfate it, it deactivates the hormone to take it to its destination site. Then when it hits its target site, the hormone can do its thing and the sulfation can do its thing. And sulfation is basically, when we think in brain sulfation or liver sulfation, basically in a simple nutshell, you're taking a fat soluble chemical, metal, a glyphosate or whatever, and you're making that toxin more water soluble so it can be evicted out via the bile or through the kidneys. So sulfation is absolutely critical. And so we as mineral practitioners have to understand the importance of sulfur. Are we getting the taurines in? An amazing sulfur containing amino acid. What about the NAC, NAC? NAC is critical not just for glutathione, but also for metallothionein, another protein structure to help cage up your toxic metals. And we also have methionine. We also have garlic, which is an instrumental part when we can come in with garlic. When people are fighting chronic infections, we can use garlic. We can use the sulfur-containing foods. And one of the greatest strategies for getting 2 of my favorite minerals, magnesium and sulfur, is Epsom salt. So with children, you know, with infants and young children, hard to give them nutrients, but we can give them baths. We can give them Epsom salt baths, foot soaks using the Epsom salt. And it's a very cheap, effective way of getting 2 minerals into them. Very important strategy to incorporate in our mineral balancing practice. Also the elderly, you know, we can have them doing foot soaks with the Epsom salt. Hopefully, you know, with bathing with the elderly may be a little bit more challenging, but they certainly can do foot soaks. So sulfation is critical. Now, the mechanism. The mechanism in which we safely utilize the sun's energy is through the oxidation of sulfur to sulfate. So sulfur to sulfate, we're adding the 4 oxygens with the help of cholesterol. This reaction takes place in the skin, catalyzed by the sunlight. In the skin, the sulfate is conjugated with both vitamin D and cholesterol, and this makes these otherwise water-insoluble sulfate molecules water-soluble. So that's the beauty of this. And the leading pioneer in this research is truly one of the heavy hitters with her credentials that would dwarf most of us. You know, PhD, MIT, Dr. Stephanie Seneff, who's written books in many peer-reviewed journals. This woman has been looking at autism, sulfation, sun, chemicals, metals, glyphosates, aluminum. And so we have a heavy hitter in the scientific community that has the credentials, that absolutely has done the research. So she isn't bought and sold by big pharma. So she's presenting the information, not tied to, you know, tainted money from big pharma. So we got some real heroes doing the research, and we need to keep, you know, giving them their dues, because not a lot of people are. So Dr. Stephanie Seneff, wonderful clinician out there, really in the research department, has been instrumental in bringing a lot of this to the limelight. So this 3-O-sulfur transferase enzyme is helping to alter the pineal heparin sulfate structure, because that pineal heparin sulfate is how melatonin, when it's made in your pineal gland, it needs to get sulfated so that melatonin can dump into the third ventricle, into the cerebral spinal fluids, so then it can be distributed to the brain. Now you have the melatonin antioxidant properties to help clean up and fight all the free radical damage, as well as the sulfation to start detoxifying the mercury, the chemicals, the glyphosates in the brain. So sulfate is a big deal, and melatonin needs to be sulfated. And when it's sulfated, it can really start doing its job. And so these are more peer-reviewed journals from heavy hitters in the world of science, you know, biochemical journals. So the pineal gland builds up heparin sulfate supplies by day. Melatonin is sulfated and transported at night. So the highly lipophilic molecule needs sulfate to make it water soluble. This allows it to move to the cerebral spinal fluid. And when that cerebral spinal fluid has these goodies in it, it's cleaning up, it's energizing every nerve fiber in you. So when melatonin is delivered, sulfate is released. So we always know in liver detoxification, there's always the 4 components: the methylation, the sulfation, the glucuronidation, and acetylation. And sulfation is a huge player in the detoxification, and we have access to it in the brain. Because remember that pineal gland, when we start looking at all our issues, you know, hormonal and sleep issues, we start thinking about the pineal gland is setting the table for everything, because the pineal gland has a direct link to the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is going to send its releasing signals to the pituitary, the anterior pituitary. The anterior pituitary is going to influence every endocrine gland in the body. So we have to start understanding that pineal gland, with that vast blood supply not protected by the blood-brain barrier, becomes very susceptible to chemical infiltration, metal toxicity. So now we can start using sulfation with with more of a keen eye, understanding how important it is. So the best strategy for sulfur metabolism is the sun. So as we use all the goodies, the MSMs, the MSMs, and the methionines and the NACs, all the good sulfur-containing amino acids, let's not forget about teaching our patients to get out in the sun. And so the sun is really, we need to take the sunglasses off. We need to take off the regular daily glasses off and allow ourselves to have natural light entering into the pupil. This is going to have a direct link right to your hypothalamus, right to that superior chiasmatic nucleus, that cluster of cell that is the biological clock hanging out right in your hypothalamus that regulates so many things. So now I'm not telling you to take your glasses off when you drive, but when you're out relaxing and you're just in your backyard or whatever, take the glasses off, let the natural light enter into the pupil. And then for darkness, make sure you're sleeping with complete darkness. Do whatever it takes to make that room pitch black. And parents, do not put these little night lights with your children. That could be, they may have fears and phobias, but we got remedies to help them to deal with their monsters and fear of dark and all that stuff. But if we don't understand how important darkness is for sleep and melatonin, how important light is for sulfation, we're not going to optimize the best strategies for our health. So closing up with the pineal gland, when we think pineal gland, think all the brain disorders, from the headaches to the migraines to the schizophrenias, depression, all the serious brain diseases, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's and all the senility related type of diseases. The addictions, let's not forget addictions. I mean, we have a culture that's addicted to food, to sugar, to sex, to drugs, the adrenaline junkies. So we have to see that that's the pineal gland. That pineal gland is very important when we're looking at addictions. And we always think the moon, that moon energy, when we become the lunatic, when we become crazy, how that influences the sodium. So connecting the dots is part of this mineral balancing. Let's not forget about the cancers. Remember, the moon rules the breast, it rules the uterus, it rules the stomach, it rules the anus, it rules the colon. So when we see cancers, breast cancers, prostate, stomach, colon, uterine cancers, think the pineal, but think the moon. Start making these connections. Bones, we know bones have melatonin receptors, so we can use melatonin when we're dealing with a lot of severe bone loss, and we'll get a little bit more into that, but just diseases of the brain, the brain fog, the spaciness, the forgetfulness, the disconnected. And we see this very commonly in our younger, the teenagers, 20-year age group. They're just disconnected. They're connected to their iPads, iPhones, and all the computer technology, but they're disconnected from life, from families and loved ones, and we're starting to see the effect of this disconnected. So we can come in with remedies in potency to help as we're balancing out the minerals, detoxifying the body. So we have strategies to deal with this pineal gland calcification, because it is absolutely calcifying prematurely, and that's affecting everything from bones to all your brain stuff to your hormones. So we need to be more aware of this connection. So melatonin used orally. So we can use melatonin from, 1 milligram up to 5 milligrams. I've heard practitioners using a lot higher doses, but I like to use this temporarily. I don't want to come in for a long term because it's still a hormone. So we still have to be a little bit careful. So I like to use melatonin when I see insomnia from jet lag, insomnia from the grave shift workers, whether it's the nurses, the doctors, the policemen, the firemen, or anyone working the graveyard shift. When you're working the graveyard shift, that's where it's going to take you. So we can dose them with melatonin, but eventually we have to educate them to figure out how to get more day shifts and not always be on the night shifts. And that's part of, as we're working on the mineral balancing, as we're working on the detoxification, we can certainly come in with melatonin in crude dosage. I've seen it be very successful for the benzodiazepines. This is one of the most ugliest drugs we have, and this will really screw up the sleep cycles. So we can use melatonin for, coming off the benzos, nicotine withdrawal. So we do have strategies to help navigate people while they're suffering, so while we're doing the physical work of, getting the right concoction of mineral balancing, and while we're detoxing, they still may not be sleeping. So we can use these things, but we have to be in tune to know that we don't want to keep them on it long term. The science, medicine is starting to understand, when they have them on the strong chemotherapeutic agents and the real aggressive drug therapies, how that's screwing up their sleep cycles. Science and medicine is using melatonin to come in to help them while they're getting those other types of treatment. And so NASA has discovered, we always know when the space boys go up there, when they come back to Earth, they're in horrible bone loss because, the no gravitational, the no light, many factors affecting the bone loss. So the first thing NASA does is they put them on the PEMF machine, the pulsed electromagnetic field therapy, which is wonderful because that influences the sodium potassium pumps. And that's going to get things going. And they also have been using melatonin to help increase osteoblastic activity for bone remodeling. So we can use melatonin orally, absolutely, just word of caution, not long term. So I mostly have used it more in this instance, and I've had great success using it short term. The moon minerals. So when we think moon minerals, we think sodium, zinc, silver. Silver classically, alchemically is the number one, but we could also have added in selenium and manganese, and there's a few others, but just for simplicity's sake, I'm sticking to the classic alchemical metal of the moon, silver. So silver it is the most conductive element on the periodic table of elements, bar none. Copper is number 2, silver is number 1. The electricians don't use silver because of the price, where copper is a little bit more affordable than silver. So silver conducts electricity. It moves electrons better than any other metal. So understanding that silver has been used as one of the greatest antibiotics known to mankind. So in many cultures, they put silver coins into their water to clean up the bacterial garbage that's in there. We as practitioners can use colloidal silver for acute infections. So let's say we have a pregnant woman, or let's say we have a woman that just delivered a baby, and we see the moon energy of the breast and mother's milk, and all of a sudden she develops a mastitis, and then she can't feed the kid because it's too painful and the infection is horrible. But you don't want to come in with a drug, with a pharma drug, because that's going to make the milk very toxic. So instead, we can use colloidal silver, add a little bit to the water, drink that, maybe a little funny aftertaste. We could take the colloidal silver, spray it right in the infected area. Within 48 hours, we're going to see these infections clear up. So the only rule with silver is to not use it long term. I'll use it for about 7 days because it's not part of mineral balancing. But what happens when patients retrace old infections? What happens if they're exposed to acute infections? What happens if we see a mastitis, or we see a throat infection, we see an ear infection? We can use colloidal silver intelligently. And silver, the silver screen. Now, so when you think photography, you think the whole cinema. Cinema is that moon theme because it's tapping into our imagination. It's giving us, a dream state of when we're watching movies, we're going into other worlds, we're fantasizing, we're in that moon energy. But For silver to be active, it needs darkness. That's why we have dark rooms in photography and filmmaking, etc. So silver truly is the silver lining that will build us up from a brain point of view, but understanding the energetics of silver and how we can use it in our mineral practice, in our daily mineral practice regimens when we come across acute infections. So we also have, now let's just think for a minute about the actual orb, the moon. It's the one orb that changes sizes and shape more than any other planet, sun, star in our universe. So it's the most changeable. We know that. We just look up at the moon. One day it's full. A few days later we could see, it's starting to get small. So we see the changeability of the moon. And so what organs change sizes and shape? Well, the stomach, of course. Skip a meal, fast, your stomach will shrink. Thanksgiving, your stomach will explode. So we know it's very similar to the moon. And what's interesting about the stomach, because it changes size and shape, just as the breast changes size and shape, just as the uterus changes sizes and shape. When we're thinking of the stomach, the quintessence, the all-star in making your stomach acid is zinc. There's many nutrients, many protein pumps that are incorporated into making stomach acid. It's a complex system, but zinc is the all-star in stomach acid that I'll explain as we move forward. But we need that stomach acid to help the liver with its secretion of bile. We need the stomach acid with helping its secretion of the pancreatic digestive juices. We need that stomach acid so we can absorb calcium, magnesium, iron, some of the B vitamins. To put the minerals in the right valency, you need stomach acid. Hence, you need zinc. So zinc is a strong moon mineral. Zinc has energy of Jupiter in making insulin and digestive juices. Zinc has energy of Mars of fighting for your immune system. Zinc has energy with copper and SOD. Zinc has energy with the sun. So zinc is going to be more the spiritual warrior, always fighting for the greater good. So when we think stomach and that stomach acid, it's your first line defense. So any infection that comes into us, when you have stomach acid, it will render any bacterial H. pylori infection, neutralize it. And so we know that H. pylori is the most common bacterial infection in the world. In fact, I get a lot of lab tests coming back and I see H. pylori quite frequently. And so that's always a zinc deficiency. Now, science will tell you you're producing too much stomach acid. That's why you have the bug. Just the opposite. Science is... We haven't even figured out light, and science is telling us the science is settled. The science is not settled. We're discovering, we're learning every day. The alchemists have always known the properties of light, and yet we're just starting to get up to speed with this. So when we think zinc, we're thinking the stomach, we're thinking the importance of stomach acid, especially for mineral balancing. I'll come back to sodium, but let me move forward with a little bit of zinc. So what's the theme of the moon? It's the mother. Mama Bear will protect everything. She is the protector. Zinc is always protecting you. It'll sacrifice itself for the greater good. Just like a lithium battery, a cadmium battery, a lead battery, typically they have a zinc anode. So the zinc anode will take the hit to protect the battery. Just as zinc is always protecting you, it will sacrifice itself for the greater good of the body. It'll protect you from mental stresses, because we know how important it is for neurotransmitter synthesis. We know it'll protect you from infections. Just to activate, to take a monocyte and to turn it into an aggressive macrophage, you need zinc. Zinc is going to make that monocyte mature into a strong macrophage. You need zinc to activate all your white blood cells. So zinc is protecting us from the infections. It's protecting us from the toxins. Just to make metallothionein, one of the great proteins that helps cage up copper and mercury and aluminum. It's a great protein that can put these toxic metals in the cage. You need that NAC, and you need a lot of zinc to make your metallothionein. It'll protect us from the physical stresses of the day. When we're working out, we're building up lactic acid. You better have zinc to break down that lactic acid. You need the zinc and the magnesium, but when we're talking the protector, it's the mother bear. Now, what's another theme of the moon? The biggest theme of the moon is fertility. We know the moon is relationship with fertility. And so zinc is a masculine mineral, although it's bringing, with that masculine energy, it's bringing that feminine quality out. So it's the male protecting the waters. It's the male protecting the entire organism. It's the spiritual warrior. It's the higher octave of iron. Iron's fighting the physical fight. Zinc is fighting the spiritual fights. So zinc has this amazing energy to it. And when we think fertility, we think, we think how zinc is so important in the production of sperm. Most men that are shooting blanks with bad motility and poor sperm count, that's a zinc deficiency. When we see all these prostate issues, that's a zinc deficiency. So zinc is an absolute moon mineral with fertility. With that fertility, we know when that sperm hits the egg, that's the quintessence of the zinc spark, exemplifying the spark of life. We've always said minerals are the spark of life. Here we see it in conception. You can watch a YouTube video and you can actually see the zinc spark when that sperm hits the egg. Now, magnesium is dealing with the birthing life on planet Earth, because the sun and photosynthesis happens because of magnesium acting as the spark of life for the universe. But individually, we see that zinc creating life when that sperm hits the egg. So zinc has a strong moon mother protecting energy. So it really is a superhero. All right, let's first talk blood. The blood pH is 7.3 to 7.4. There's that magic number 7. That 7 is a very powerful number, and we can see the 3-4 harmonics, 7.3 to 7.4. That 3-4 harmonics will show up in everything in life. We see in astrology, cardinal, fixed, mutable, the 3 modes in astrology, and the 4 elements: fire, water, air, earth. There's that 3-4 harmonics. We know that we have 4 seasons, the summer and winter, fall and spring, but 3 months in each season. So we can see this 3-4 harmonics just on my fingers, 4 fingers, 3 joints on each finger. And we see it in the blood. Blood is the juice of life. It's the fluid. It's that moon energy. Blood is also going to have a copper Venus vein energy. Blood is also going to have a artery Mars energy. Blood is also going to have a capillary sun energy, but the fluids, generally, it's the moon. And we're going to start seeing, we have to keep this pH in balance, because this pH cannot waver, not 1 iota. So the pH is the potential of hydrogen. And so we know that CO2, we know it's a gas, but ultimately it becomes an acid. So we have to deal with the acids of life, because we produce acids. Part of everyday life, you're always generating acids: lactic acid, phosphoric acid, oxalic acid, uric acids. The body is always creating acids. So CO2 is governed via the quality of air we're breathing, how we're breathing, understanding to teach people about the yogic breath, understanding how food influences CO2. So CO2 is influenced by many factors, but ultimately every protein, fat, carb is going to be broken down into water and CO2. We have to be able to deal with this CO2, and thank God we have zinc, because when CO2 inevitably diffuses into the blood, it's going to immediately react with water. So CO2 diffuses into the blood, immediately reacts with water to make your carbonic acid. It makes your carbonic acid because of this ancient enzyme, the carbonic anhydrase enzyme, that is absolutely zinc dependent. So without zinc, we don't make carbonic acid. And carbonic acid can deal with the CO2, and it does so. Now this arrow should go both ways, because this reaction goes both ways. So we can deal with CO2 once it gets into the blood. Inevitably, it becomes the carbonic acid. Now, carbonic acid can be dealt with in the kidneys. In the kidneys, that's going to make your bicarbonate system. That's the entire buffering system. So when they say zinc is the great alkaline mineral, that is why, because zinc with the carbonic acid makes the bicarbonate system. Now, when the carbonic acid goes to the stomach, the carbonic acid will disassociate, go through many little different processes, but ultimately it'll make your stomach acid. That's when I say zinc is the all-star for making stomach acid, it's because of carbonic acid, when it's in the stomach, will make your HCl. Zinc, or carbonic acid, when it goes to the lungs, it will also disassociate, and then the CO2 in the water can be released as a vapor gas into the air, and then the plants will eat that up as their lunch. So the importance of this carbonic acid, the highlight is it's because of this enzyme, for which this enzyme is absolutely zinc dependent. So that's why we say that zinc is truly a superhero, because we don't have an acid reserve, we have an alkaline reserve. We have an alkaline reserve because we have zinc to make our carbonic acid. When I look at blood tests, I always see low CO2, elevated anion gap. An anion gap means, okay, you know, we have the 7 macro minerals. We got the 3 anions, phosphorus, sulfur, chloride. Those are your negative anions. And we got the 4 cations: calcium, magnesium, sodium, potassium. There's that 3-4 harmonics again. And so we can see how important the alkaline reserve is, and how important zinc is as your main alkaline reserve mineral. So we need to exalt zinc in our understanding. So that doesn't mean we come in with heroic doses of zinc. We don't come in with 150 milligrams and, you know, expect the miracles, because if zinc doesn't get into the cell, then it's going to spill into the fluids, into the blood, and then it can become an oxide version, and that can lead to restless leg and cause many unwanted symptoms. We also got to be careful with the copper sensitive ones, you know, because zinc can force the copper out. So we have to understand how to intelligently use zinc. When I prescribe zinc, I always want to prescribe it throughout the course of the day, again, based on the mineral patterns that I'm looking at. But I'm going to be more on the aggressive side, but I'm certainly not going to give heroic doses of zinc. I will, you know, maybe in an acute infection for a week, maybe I'll do heroic doses of zinc, but it won't be long term. But generally speaking, I love to come in with zinc throughout the course of the day, and to always use a zinc ionophore to help zinc get into the cell. We need some of the, you know, the turmerics, the curcumins, the quercetins. Those help to shuttle zinc into the cell. So when I prescribe zinc, I'm also prescribing one of those plant-based bioflavonoids to help zinc work its magic, because eventually zinc has to get into the cell. So I just wanted to exalt zinc in our understanding so we have a better feel for it, a better understanding of it, because I know there's many groups out there and practitioners out there that are dogging zinc, and they're demonizing zinc. They're sniffing McDonald's, they're freebasing the Kool-Aid because they don't understand how important zinc is for keeping the body in an alkaline state. That's why it truly is the alkaline mineral. So just wanted to drive home zinc. Now, sodium. Sodium is the quintessence of the moon. So moon is the water. You dive into the waters, you're diving into the salt water. And so we can see in this picture the moon with a sodium tail stretching out for miles and miles and miles, and it's showing this moon sodium relationship, as above so below. In the waters we see it, in the solar system we see it. So sodium is such an important mineral. It's one of the great macro minerals. It's a monovalent mineral. It's got a 1 charge with potassium and lithium. And so we got to understand it dissolves things. This is the beauty. This is the volatility of sodium that it can present with. And so when we see low sodium, or we see high sodium or high sodium potassium ratio or low sodium potassium ratio, let's understand the energy of sodium. So we know the oceans should be calm, and when they're calm, they're beautiful, they're restless, they're beautiful, they're flowing the emotions. And so when the emotions are flowing in a nice even state, they're not too low, they're not too high, that's how we're functioning in this world. We're getting along, moving along, understanding, speaking our truth. When the sodium becomes too high, we see the volatility. So a patient that may have high sodium, they'll be more volatile, more angry, more combative. They'll have a knee-jerk reflex. They'll blame you. They'll blame this. They'll blame that. And so we have to understand their personality of that lunatic moon energy, so we don't react to their reaction when they have high sodium, because high sodium will irritate the kidneys, and it will bring out the belligerence, the anger, and all that kind of toxic emotions. So we as practitioners have to understand the energy of that lunatic high moon energy. Now, just the opposite, if that sodium is too low, and how many times do we see low sodium, low potassium, low sodium, low potassium, over and over and over? That is adrenal burnout. So we know sodium is highly related to aldosterone in the estrogens, and we know everyone is estrogen dominant, and aldosterone is an inflammatory. To put out the inflammation, to put out the fire, we need the cortisol, and cortisol is mostly a potassium reaction, where aldosterone is a sodium response, and we see the edema in the calves. Remember, that calf is always your second heart, so better that we're getting cramps and edema in the calves, because eventually it's going to be the heart. So this is giving us some time as we work on these things. But the low sodium patient is going to be, they're not going to be calm, they're going to be more depressed. They're going to be more lethargic. They're going to have more of the moon bodies. They're going to be putting on the weight. They're going to have more chronic inflammation in the body, where the high sodium is going to have more acute inflammation in the body. And that high sodium will cause the blood pressure to spike. Eventually, it'll go into the joints, and that will be some of the crippling arthritis down the road. But when we see the high sodium, we got to know the personality of the patient. When we see the low sodium patient, they may not be as compliant because they don't have energy. They can't speak their, they don't have that adrenal reserve, so they become more the doormat. They get walked on. They're not speaking their truth. They're not speaking up for what they feel is right. So they tend to get more walked on, and they tend to be not as compliant. So we got to understand the energy of sodium, energy of the moon, and we have to support that. Now, we can support that in many ways, and while we're figuring out, or when I'm figuring out their mineral patterns and coming in with all the the good minerals and the nutrients. I'm also coming in potency, homeopathic remedies to understand when someone becomes very belligerent. I'm going to give them a Mars moon remedy. When someone is more depressed and more lethargic, maybe I'm going to give them a moon Jupiter remedy or a moon sun remedy. So this is how I like to practice, but I just wanted fellow practitioners to understand the energy of these minerals, because like I have previously said, minerals are just not soulless electrons, protons, and neutrons floating in space. They're not just dead rocks. They have an energy that's cosmic, that bursts life. So we need to exalt our relationship to these minerals and have a better feel for them. Start to understand that alchemy goes back thousands and thousands of years. Hippocrates was an alchemist. We all take the Hippocratic oath. Remember Hippocrates? Well, I'm not going to get into Hippocrates right now, but he was an alchemist. Paracelsus was an alchemist. Samuel Hahnemann was an alchemist. So some of the great, great doctors have paved the way to understand the energetics behind the minerals and the herbs and all these things when we're making spargeric tinctures or whatever. We're using alchemy. So that term may be so esoteric and out there, but when we start to understand it and start to practically in practice, we use it. So we start to get a better feel for the energy of these minerals. All right, let's move on. This is fascinating. So we're going to talk about the lunar month, aka the lunar cycle, the lunar angle, the lunar return. You can use any of those verbiages interchangeably, but the lunar month is the sun moon angle the moment you were born on planet Earth, when you took your first breath. So when you took your first breath, where was the relationship of the sun and the moon? What was the angle? It could be at 0 degrees, it could be at 10 degrees, it could be at a 90 degree, at a full moon, at a waning moon. So it will be at anywhere from 0 to 360 degrees will be your lunar angle, your lunar return. So I'm going to talk about me for, looking from a male perspective, and I'll talk about the female perspective as we move on. But I was born about 6 days before the full moon. So my lunar angle, the moment I took my first breath when I was on planet Earth, living in Brockton, Massachusetts, at the time of my birth on Friday around 4 a.m. or so. It was somewhere around between 4 and 5, but my intuitive sense tells me it was 4:08 a.m. So I was born at 107 degrees. Okay, at that 107 degrees, that's my lunar angle. Now, if I wanted to get pregnant with my wife and donate my seed, that would be the time that I would want to donate my genetic material. That's when my genetic material will have the most oomph. My sperm will increase 10x on this day. My motility will increase. My genetic material will increase. Of course, that's one half of the equation. So if I had sex on that, it actually is 24 hours before your lunar return. That's the peak optimal time, 24 hours before that 107 degree. So my lunar angle is 107 degree. The most potent time would be 24 hours before that 107 degree angle. That's the time I want to donate my precious little seed, donate my Michael Phillips sperm, Mark Spitz sperm, so my little swimmers can do their magic to give the best of me. That's debatable. So anyway, the lunar angle is very important. But again, the woman has to be ovulating at that time for the conception to happen. So this is why I highly encourage people that are struggling with fertility or PMS to work with an astrologer to know your lunar angle, because this is a very important time. So now when we're talking about the moon, generally speaking, we have a lunar orbit. The lunar orbit is the moon around the Earth, and that's typically 28 days. We also have a lunar month. That's from one full moon all the way to a new full moon, and that's approximately 29 and a half days. So the moon cycle is going to vary. You're going to hear anything from 27 and a half days to 29 and a half days. But the one thing is for sure, your lunar angle. That's your personal lunar cycle. So we want to understand our lunar cycle, especially if we're dealing with conception and contraception and PMS and all that stuff. So let's talk about the woman for a minute. So Dr. Eugene Jonas, a Czechoslovakian doctor practicing in a very Catholic region who was using the rhythm method with a subpar, batting average. And because of his upbringing, he didn't want to do abortions. And so he needed to find a better method. And so he was reading a very ancient Babylon astrological text. And what he read was, women are fertile during a certain phase of the moon. That was his epiphany. And so this epiphany went off, and now he was able he didn't have computers at the time, so he did a lot of work and a lot of calculation, and he found the lunar angle. So the time of a woman's fertility depends on the reoccurrence of the angle. That's your lunar return between that sun and the moon that occurred at the woman's birth. So when we know the lunar angle, this is a predictable and repeating pattern occurs when that sun-moon angle present at a woman's birth returns once every lunar month, at which time she has the potential to spontaneously ovulate no matter where she is in her menstrual cycle. So we've heard of women who are having sex when they're menstruating. And so when they're having sex when menstruating, if that woman's lunar angle was at the same time, she can spontaneously ovulate and get pregnant. So we know, we've heard of stories where women were getting pregnant while menstruating, while on birth control, while even pregnant. And that's not a miraculous conception. That is a moon phenomena, an astrological, scientific moon phenomena of your lunar angle that can provoke a spontaneously, the follicle to spontaneously ovulate at that time. So if you happen to have sex at that time, yes, you can get pregnant. So that lunar peak is 24 hours leading up to the return of the exact sun-moon angle present at a woman's birth. Many women whose mid-cycle ovulation is not synchronized with their lunar cycle may nonetheless spontaneously ovulate. And that's what we just explained when women are getting pregnant while on birth control, pregnant, or menstruating. Women are statistically more likely to have their mid-cycle ovulation at their lunar peak than any other time. So statistically, we see that lunar angle tends to coincide when they ovulate. So we want to get better moon rhythms, better moon understanding, so we can really... What do we see today? We see more fertility clinics on every corner of every street in every city of this nation. So we know we're plagued with fertility issues. So we're so disconnected from the moon. So we have to really understand how important it is to reconnect to natural cycles of this planet. And so as mineral practitioners, we need to be able to, teach our patients. Maybe we could say, hey, you need to work with an astrologer to find your lunar angle, and then we can get better understanding how we can, from a mineral, herbal, homeopathic perspective, how we can support them when we know their cycles and we know what's going on. What else did I want to say about that? So, well, let me just come back to that. So when we're talking about this, so it's important that, women know their mucus secretions. So when they know their mucus secretions, when they know their basal temperature, when they know their lunar angle, we can use that trinity for conception or contraception with an amazing batting average that would blow away most other means of contraception or conception. So again, we can use natural methods for this, and we just have to reconnect to this natural energy. All right, I'll move on now. Okay, so let's say it's a new moon, and in this new moon, the premenstrual cycle, the menstrual cycle, this is a time that a woman is not going to be as outgoing. This is a time to reflect like the moon. This is a time to sleep like the moon, to regenerate like the moon. This is a time when you don't want a lot on your social calendar. You don't want to be the outgoing little personality bubble that you are. You want this time to recharge and to journal and to sleep and to heal and to reflect. So we want to use these cycles to our advantage. So I always said that there's a war on your pineal gland, because we know the pineal and hormones, because pineal to the hypothalamus to the pituitary is going to affect the gonads. So we know this connection, and we know that pineal gland is under attack. So how do we take this back? Understand your own natural rhythms, your own cycles. You don't want to be doing things, outgoing things and taking on huge projects, or, not taking the time to sleep. This is the time to recharge, to be the mother to yourself. Take that moon energy and mother yourself. This is the perfect time to do that. And then in the second half of the phase, we're going to be more outgoing. We're going to be more sexy. We're going to be more flirtatious and more energetic, and we may not sleep as great when that moon is full. So when I know the moon is full, I'm not trying to go to bed early. I'm using that energy for my creativity. I may be studying more, writing more, doing more things, and I'm not going to force myself to go to bed early at this time, where during the new moon I will take, I'll make up for my sleep loss here and make it up for it in this part of the equation. So know your cycles, know how important these cycles really are to reconnect. And hormonally, this is when we're at the lowest. Estrogen is the lowest, progesterone is the lowest, copper is at the lowest. So we can actually kind of come in with certain, we can give them more progesterone during the cycle. We can give them more progesterone during the progesterone cycle. We can give some copper during the cycle when they're battling fatigue and lethargy and, mood stuff. So we need to understand this energy. Now, I'll talk about copper in the Venus presentation, but just generally speaking, when we say what is the most feminine planet in the solar system, of course, it's Venus. Venus is the daughter, the moon is the mother. Those are the two feminine principles. But when we think femininity and sexy and beauty and art and sex, that's all strong Venetian energy. So we know at the highest peak of copper is the highest peak of estrogen. So we know copper and estrogen are intimately related, and we know that Venus, the metal of Venus, since the beginning of time, has always been copper. The alchemists have always known this. Even we can determine the sex of the fetus based on if there's more copper, it's going to be a girl. If it's more iron, it's going to be a boy. They've known this since the beginning of time. Even the iconic masterpiece painted by Botticelli, The Birth of Venus, where you got the beautiful Aphrodite sitting on that calcium shell. And we know the relationship of copper and calcium, and that calcium shell is actually an oyster shell. No coincidence that oyster shell use copper for its breath. Where most creatures use iron for breathing, we use copper in that. So the the masterpiece of that painting, that truly iconic masterpiece by Botticelli, was painted on the island of Cyprus. Cyprus in Latin means cuprum. Cuprum means copper. So the birth of the feminine, the birth of Aphrodite, is the birth of copper. So we have to understand this copper Venetian energy. Does copper in that Venetian energy become venerated, or does it become venereal? And so we have to understand the energetic. So again, I'll talk more about this in my Venus presentation, but just wanted to highlight a couple things. Now in part 3, I'm going to get into homeopathic remedies and moon remedies that I like to use. And this will be for practitioners that are interested in maybe learning about homeopathy. And I would encourage every practitioner to study the cell salts. Start with the 12 salts, and then you could turn any remedy into a 6x potency, because I consider all tissue salts 6x. So we can start with the 12 tissue salts, learn them, and I'll talk about that in part 3 in the classic moon remedies that I like to use, because the cell salts you can prescribe them many ways, from symptom pictures to astrological prescribing. You can use them as tonics. You can use them many ways to help move a case in the right direction. So the cell salts, so when you think of a cell salt in that 6x potency, it's not quite a mineral, although it is. It's not quite a homeopathic remedy, although it is. It's a mineral pinch, and it's got the energy of the homeopathy. So it's a beautiful, safe, effective tool to use, especially for infants, especially for young children, and especially for the elderly. So we got to have more tools in our toolbox that we can work with. So I'm strongly encouraging practitioners to learn your cell salts, and that will be part 3. All right, I've rambled on long enough. If you have any questions, thoughts, just leave me a message and I will get back to you. Once again, thank you for watching.